Start the recording. Okay, I want to welcome everybody. It is Education Night for September the 22nd, 2022. And just I want to welcome everybody. Let's see, we got 21 people in here today. I want to just see if we had a couple people that I thought new people were going to come in and a couple to visit, but doesn't look like they're not going to come. They're not here tonight.
Yeah, so, my friend was tied up. I gave him the short notice.
Okay. Just a couple announcements. I just want to reiterate that we're going to be doing what we're calling One Day Tampa Bay Camera Club photo walk on November the 12th, which is a Saturday. We're gonna do a specific walk in Dunedin at 4 o'clock on the 12th for those who want to gather together and do a photo walk together. But since we have so many people now that are all over the United States, you can, that particular day on November the 12th, anytime you go out and shoot on that day, and we're going to share all the pictures from wherever everybody is. So even if you can't make it to Dunedin and you're in the Tampa Bay area, shoot for wherever you are, and we'll make a big slideshow of all the images from that particular day to share with everybody. So there'll be more details about this on the website later next month, but just wanted to, everybody to keep that in mind. That's the 12th of November. Our next couple, we only have 2 assignments left for the year. The October assignment is ICM, which is intentional camera movement, and then November is fall colors. So those are the last 2 assignments for the year. Obviously today we have Jim doing time-lapse photography for us, and then next month we have a special presentation by Jennifer Renwick. She's going to be talking about, she's a fantastic landscape photographer, and she's going to be talking to us about blue hour, shooting in blue hour, which is a very short amount of time. They call it an hour, but it's really not an hour. So, and yeah, I think you'll enjoy her. She's really nice. She's a really good teacher, and she's a great photographer. So, Jim, do you have any other announcements you'd like to throw out here?
Let's see. Well, I'm looking forward to doing tonight's presentation. Also, anybody that's let me see who's here. Okay, now I've got some stuff that applies just to some specific people, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'll just send the information out to those people. So I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments or questions? All right, then I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Go ahead, Jim. It's all yours.
Okay. Yeah, because my schedule's a little crazy. I never for sure whether I can be here or not. I pre-recorded my presentation about a month ago. So I've got a recording to play for you. After the recording, we can take a little break, and then we can go into Q&A and discussion from there. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up and actually play a recording for you. It's time-lapse and hyperlapse is the topic, and I'm going to go ahead and just hold on for a second and let me get it. I'm going to play it directly from my machine, and I also have it posted online. I'm going to send out, I'll send out a link in the chat, and I will also give the link to Lynn so that Lynn can post it on the website after the meeting. So that if anybody wants to go back and replay it, you can replay it at your convenience if you want to. So.
But you'll be able to record. We're recording the whole meeting too, so you'll be able to see if you want to see the whole meeting or just video. You can go it either way.
Yeah, but if you go from the link, it'll be better quality than watching it recorded from a Zoom screen. So. Give me just a second here to get what I need going here. I got in late because I didn't have a link for the meeting. So I planned on being here early and having this ready to go.
I want to know when fall is going to start.
It's definitely less humidity today.
It was 96 degrees on my car.
It was 94 degrees here, but it was less humid. Yeah. I have a trick light in my barn that only comes on when the humidity is less than 60%. Came on today. It's been the first time it's come on in weeks.
I think it's broken.
Yeah, definitely has an issue. But I
At
noticed
least
it only comes on when there's not a lot of humidity.
At
I'm
least we're not
anxiously
Puerto
waiting for
Rico.
this temperature below 70. It hasn't been below 70 since May.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
And that's, to me, that's when fall starts, when we first get a temperature in Tampa in the 60s. And
Yeah, but usually it happens and then it goes right back up to where it was before. You know? You get one little day of fall.
well, I'll take it right now.
Oh, Valerie says it's 75 in California.
That's not
Yeah,
fair.
not to
I-
rub it in.
This-
It's beautiful in Boston too.
Oh, rub it in.
This is Rod. I'm in
Okay.
Wisconsin. I had a 9 o'clock tea time this morning. It was 42 degrees.
Oh, wow.
It was 40 degrees in Colorado today.
And I had that video file queued up
Okay.
if you're
go for
ready.
it.
All right.
We can see it. We can see.
Okay.
We can see it.
All right. I'm going to hit the play button. Give it a couple seconds and holler at me if for some reason you can't see it. I'll pause. But can everybody see it on their screen?
We can see the
Yeah.
screen. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. If everybody can see it, I'm going to hit the play button. Hi there. Let's talk about time-lapse and hyperlapse. What's the difference? Well, you saw both in the intro. Time-lapse refers to a sequence where the camera is stationary and the subject is in motion. This is a time-lapse. Hyperlapse refers to a sequence where the camera is in motion. The subject may or may not also be in motion, but the key to a hyperlapse is that the camera either physically moves its position or changes its direction of view during the sequence. This is a hyperlapse with the camera physically in motion. This is a hyperlapse where the camera is in a stationary position but changes its direction of view. Let's start out talking about using a typical DSLR or a mirrorless camera to do the job. Later, I'll show you some alternative camera options that you may like to take advantage of as well. For a time-lapse sequence, you need to get your camera into a position where it will take photographs from. That can be as simple as placing it on the ground or a table, or it could mean using a tripod or some other type of stable mounting system. If you're doing a hyperlapse sequence, you can simply handhold the camera and move it, or you can use a variety of mounts. You can use some sort of body mount to attach it to you while you move. There's also a wide array of vehicle mounts that you can use to attach a camera to a moving vehicle. You can use a slider. There are several out there that are motorized and will move at a speed that you set as your camera takes photos for your sequence. You can also use a rotating mount. There are several different types, and you can even make use of a star tracker if you have one. Most star trackers have a hyperlapse mode where you can adjust the rotational speed of the star tracker, and many of them even have a built-in function so that you can use this USB port to connect to the camera via USB. And then you can allow the star tracker to actually trigger the camera as it moves. This can be especially handy if you have a camera system that doesn't have a built-in intervalometer. The software and the hardware of the star tracker system take over that for you. You can program all your information into the star tracker software, and then it will move the camera at the speed you want it to, and will also take the pictures for you by triggering the shutter via the USB port. As I just mentioned, there are some cameras with no built-in intervalometer functions. If that's the case, you do need to rely on an external device that can do that. There are separate remote trigger cable releases that are programmable, as well as other external devices such as motorized sliders, star trackers, etc., that can handle the job if your camera can't do it on its own. Let's talk about camera settings now. The first thing to think about is that a time-lapse or hyperlapse requires a lot of individual images if you're going to have a sequence that lasts any more than a few seconds. When you put together a time-lapse or a hyperlapse, the typical frame rate that would be used when you render your final video is 30 frames per second. That means that for every 30 images your camera captures, you get 1 second of movie in the end. If you want to make a 30-second time-lapse or hyperlapse, that means you need 900 images if you're going to run it at 30 frames per second when you render it. By the way, I'm using 30 frames per second as a reference because anything that you put online on sites such as YouTube will be played back for the viewer at 30 frames per second. So for technical reasons, it's often best to render your hyperlapse or time-lapse at 30 frames per second to avoid glitchy looking playback when people watch your creation. The point I want to make, though, is that it's going to require that you capture and then process a large quantity of images to make your final creation. That means you don't want to spend a lot of time and fill up a lot of space on your cards and on your hard drives by shooting in RAW format for a time-lapse or a hyperlapse. Remember, if you publish your creation online, it will typically be viewed at dimensions of 1920 by 1080 or smaller at 72 ppi. Shooting RAW files for this is overkill and will slow you down tremendously. I always shoot my sequences in JPEG format. In fact, I don't even shoot in JPEG fine mode. I shoot in lower resolution JPEG normal mode. Even those files still need to be reduced in size to put a time-lapse or hyperlapse together. So by shooting in the lower resolution to start with, I don't eat up as much space on my memory cards. I don't use up the buffer in my camera, and my computer system does not have to work as hard or as long to process the files. While I'm talking about capturing a lot of images for time-lapse or hyperlapse, another thing I want you to consider is that your camera will need to run continuously, sometimes for a very long length of time, especially if you're making a night sky time-lapse or hyperlapse and each individual exposure is long. Your camera may need to run continuously for several hours. Your battery may not be able to keep your camera powered up for the length of time needed, and you may need to consider an alternate power source. A battery grip with extra batteries in it is an option. This particular one holds 2 additional batteries, and therefore, when attached to the camera, there are 3 batteries that the camera can run through. Some cameras allow an option to plug in a dummy battery, such as this, that can be connected to an external power source. This particular one can be plugged into an AC electrical outlet via this transformer adapter, or it can be plugged into an external power bank battery. Now you need to be aware that many modern cameras will not turn on unless the battery door is closed. Therefore, your battery door needs to have an access port for the cord to come out from the dummy battery while the battery door is closed. Some cameras have this accommodation, as you can see here. However, some people that want to use this option have actually been known to drill a hole through their battery door to accomplish this. Be aware, that will certainly void your warranty. Some models of cameras will also allow you to power the camera through its USB port. That allows you to use a large power bank battery such as this, or an AC electrical wall transformer unit such as this, to keep your camera running as long as you need to during a recording session. If you're lucky enough to use certain brands of cameras, such as what I shoot with, your camera will have all of the options I showed you available to you for maximum flexibility. Once you set up your camera to have enough power to last through a session and set up to record images in JPEG format, then you'll want to dial in the rest of your settings as normal and take test shots until you're happy with the result as a starting point. I suggest that you manually choose a shutter speed and manually choose an aperture. If you have concerns about the light and your exposure changing during a sequence, then I suggest that you use auto ISO to account for that, because in the final rendering of your video, variances in ISO will not be as noticeable as aperture changes or shutter speed changes that could occur while recording your images. If you were to shoot in aperture priority with a fixed ISO and let the camera vary the shutter speed, then variances in the amount of motion blur occurring during the sequence could be noticeable. If you shoot in shutter speed priority with a fixed ISO, then changes in depth of field during your sequence could be noticeable when your aperture changes. Motion blur and depth of field won't visibly change during a sequence if you allow the ISO to be the value that varies to accommodate your chosen exposure value. Now that you have all that other stuff figured out, it's time to determine your intervalometer settings. The first thing you want to consider is the interval between the end of one exposure and the start of the next. If you have a fast camera and a fast memory card, you can set your interval to be as small as 1 second in between the end of one shot and the start of another. Take into account, though, that if your camera is slow, or your memory card is slow, or you have your camera set for long exposure noise reduction, then you have to take those items into account and set the interval between shots to have a long enough gap to allow the camera to process and write a file before it takes the next exposure. You may want a longer interval between shots simply based on the subject matter that you're recording. For the driving and walking sequences that you saw earlier, I had a 1 second interval set. For night sky photography, I will often set a longer interval, such as 10 seconds to 30 seconds, to allow the resulting gap in time to show more motion of stars, clouds, etc. Depending on what you want to depict in your final creation, you may even want an interval as long as several minutes or even hours. Time-lapse sequences of flowers blossoming, for instance, often have very long intervals between shots. The next consideration is the number of shots that you want to take. Typically, you can program a desired number into the camera or the auxiliary device that's controlling the camera, and recording will stop when the desired number of exposures have been taken. Some cameras give you an option for an infinite number of shots, and then you can simply let the camera run as long as you want until you either manually stop it or until its batteries or its power source dies. Oftentimes, when I'm camping, I will set a camera up, point it at the sky, set the number of exposures to infinity, and let the camera run all night until I wake up or until the batteries die. I also do this a lot during meteor showers, not necessarily to create a time lapse, but simply to have a few hundred or a few thousand images to look at in the morning and see if the camera captured any meteors without me needing to stay up and babysit the camera all night. Some cameras or devices may also give you an option to delay the start of the time sequence. That's helpful if you need to set up the camera in a location in advance and don't want to go back to it to start recording at the proper time. An example of this might be if you're camping somewhere and want to make a night sky or a Milky Way time lapse, and the best vantage point for the sky is not where you're actually camping. You could hike out to the camera location late in the afternoon, dial in all your camera settings, and then program the camera to start recording on its own after it gets dark. Now that you know how to set the camera up and can record a sequence, let's go to the computer and see how to process your images and turn them into a time-lapse or a hyperlapse video. The first thing that we want to do is to import a series of images from the camera that are going to be the source for our time-lapse or hyperlapse. The next step typically is to take the first image in your sequence and make the necessary adjustments to it. In this case, there's no exposure difference between this and all the rest of the 900 shots that are there. So I can make my adjustments, and then I'll be able to synchronize the adjustments from this image to the rest of the 900 images that are going to be used to create this particular time lapse. All of the images in this sequence were recorded in the camera's native aspect ratio of 2:3, but I'm showing this to you separately because it's an option you might want to consider, and that's changing the aspect ratio to a 16:9 cinematic format. I'm going to go ahead and do this now and synchronize that crop to all of the images in the sequence. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could do this when you do your original adjustments and only need to synchronize one time. This next step is of critical importance. Even if your images come out of camera in sequence by name, Photoshop tends to not like that and won't put them together properly. You do have to rename them in a sequential order before you take them into Photoshop. Now we're going to export the files with the proper settings to create an HD time-lapse video. You're going to save them as a JPEG, 1920 pixels on the long side at 72, and adjust the quality to your liking. Now we are ready to open those images in Photoshop to create our time-lapse video. Here's the procedure. Choose File, Open, and navigate to the folder that contains the images that you exported from Lightroom. Only click on the first file and then check the box that says Image Sequence. Choose a frame rate, in this case 30 frames per second. You'll notice it's the default. If your Photoshop is not set up to show it, check the timeline option. A representation of your video will appear at the bottom of the screen that you can work on. Now let's make this night sky sequence a little more interesting by adding some dramatic cinematic music in the background. Take your audio track, drop it onto the timeline underneath the video in the audio track location. You can use the scissors tool to trim the audio to match the length of your video. I also want you to know that while you're in Photoshop, you can make adjustments to the video in pretty much the same manner as you would a standard still photo. In this case, for demonstration purposes, I'm putting a curve adjustment layer on it. When you're all done, click the menu at the right side of the timeline and choose Render Video. You'll get a menu with some export options. Go ahead and give your creation a name. And until you become more advanced at this process, you can leave the rest of their values at their default settings. When it finishes rendering, you can play back your file and enjoy your masterpiece. Now, let's talk about a few options that you can take advantage of to speed up the process of creating a time lapse or a hyperlapse. There are some kinds of cameras out there that can take the shots and process the video and save a lot of time for you. Action cameras, such as this GoPro, have built-in time-lapse and hyperlapse functions that you can program, and as soon as you're done taking the shots, it processes them into a video for you in camera, and you can play it back immediately and see how it looks. This Osmo Pocket camera is stabilized with a 3-axis gimbal and also makes time-lapse and hyperlapse videos internally. Most decent cell phones now also have that functionality built into them. I use all of these tools to create time-lapse and hyperlapse videos. In fact, during this demonstration, I've shown you sequences made with DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, a GoPro action camera, an Osmo Pocket stabilized camera, and my cell phone.
Great, Jim.
Okay, I guess it. I didn't have to stop sharing the screen. It automatically took care of that on its own.
Whoop, done.
So
Well
Yeah.
done, Jim.
we can take a little break, and then I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and I can bring up software, share my screen, answer questions. Pretty much show you anything you want to know, and help you out with that.
What's that Osmo thing?
It's a very small 3-axis gimbal still photo and video camera, but it's stabilized on its own gimbal.
What is it called, Jim?
It's called a DJI Osmo Pocket.
DJI Osmo Pocket.
It's
Yeah.
actually easier to use your phone than it is to use that thing. I have one.
It's
too.
it's a drone camera that's handheld.
Right.
DJI makes drones, but they took their drone camera and put it in a handheld option.
Lynn, do we have hyperlapse in our iPhones?
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
as
think
long as you're moving the phone, it becomes hyperlapse. We have time lapse in the iPhone.
We
and as
do?
long as, yeah, you have time lapse setting. If you look in your native camera, it's right there, next to slow. It's over all the way to the left on an iPhone.
Yeah.
And if you move the camera, then it becomes hyperlapse.
Yeah. So yeah, put your iPhone in time lapse mode and start walking with it, and you'll make a hyperlapse.
Jim, what about time lapse in movie mode? I noticed that's in my camera, this newest one I bought.
What is it again, Chris?
I haven't tried this, but I read in the instruction manual, which is not something I do often, but it talks about doing time lapse movies. I'm sorry, it talks about doing time lapse in your movie mode.
Oh, okay. There's
Yeah, you have that in your camera as well. I don't know if you've tried that or not.
Not in all of my cameras have their own separate intervalometer that you can set that up and do that with. Now,
Yeah.
what some software can do, if it's doing it from movie mode, you're already recording in movie mode, depending on the frame rate you choose, probably 30 frames per second, most likely. And then what it can do, it can take one frame every 30 frames and basically turn it into a time lapse, which is basically chopping up a video. If you're talking about it being done, from movie mode, it's just going to take, one frame every second, or whatever interval you specify. If you're recording video and you specify your time lapse to be at 2-second intervals or 5-second intervals, it's just going to take one frame, out from every interval that you specify, and then put it together as a time lapse.
The instructions said it's basically the same. except that you can't record in RAW
Mhm.
if we cared, right?
Right. Yeah. And, like I say, you typically don't want or do not need that for, for that anyway. Because even if you're going to post it, as I mentioned earlier, if you're going to post it on YouTube or anything like that, it's going to play back, typically at best, it's going to be anywhere from 720 to 1920 HD to full HD. Most likely, very few people are going to have the capability to look at it at 4K, but you're going to be playing it at HD or FHD, and it's going to be at 30 frames a second. Raw is overkill. Raw is beyond overkill for a time lapse.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's why, like I say, I don't even shoot JPEG fine. I shoot JPEG normal if I'm going to put something in a time lapse or a hyperlapse.
Jim,
Because
when
even that's overkill.
Tom,
The exported files that are going to go to Photoshop and then get put online are going to be, are going to be chopped down, and I'm just wasting space with those bigger files when they're going to be put to a smaller file size anyway for the end result, unless you just really want to, heat up your processor and make really big files to put on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Diana.
No, when you did your bridge shot, the clouds over the bridge,
Yeah.
and I suck at math, so I'm gonna put that right out there. You said 30, was that a 30-second? Can you explain that?
Yeah,
30
what you saw in the intro was actually just a chopped piece of a longer time lapse. I was at the Skyway Bridge one day and I was doing infrared photos for a couple hours. But what I did, I set a DSLR up on a tripod and pointed at the bridge and turned the intervalometer on, and I let it take that had an interval of every 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds it was taking a picture, and I left that camera alone and went and did my thing, and had another camera, walked around, took infrared pictures, did a bunch of stuff, and let that camera sit there the whole time, and then came back. And I actually had about 90 seconds of video rendered from that, because I had a couple thousand images on that camera, when by the time I shut it off.
And how can you tell whether you have a fast card?
You buy a fast memory card. The ratings on the card will tell you the speed.
I don't know anything about that.
What,
What my question, you were talking about how you would go out in the afternoon and set up the camera to take it and set it for a certain time. Don't you worry that you're going to come back and the camera's going to be gone?
Depends on where you're at.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that.
A lot of the places where I hike and camp are very remote, and I have no worries that my camera is going to be missing when I come back to it.
unless an alligator or bear takes it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the camera does have a delay start timer, in it that you can see on it, that you can set it, several hours. You can set hours, minutes, and seconds delay, and then walk away from it, and then at the specified time, it will turn itself on and start recording.
And
Jim, I know
X-T3 has that function?
What's that?
The X-T3 has that function?
Yes, it does. In fact, that menu I showed you was on an XT3. It's the last option in your intervalometer. Your intervalometer in your XT3 gives you what the interval is, what the number of shots are, and then what the delay time is, until when you want it to start. You can have it start immediately, or you can have it, delay, by I think it's up to 99 hours, 99 hours and 59 minutes and 59 seconds.
Hey,
Jim,
Jim.
go ahead. I got one question. You did mention first that you wanted to take a break before questions, but I certainly have a couple that I could throw at you.
Yeah, we dived right into it, so
Go for it.
I'm good with it.
All right, you're good with it. And during your video presentation, I didn't notice your white balance. Did you include that in there?
Well, that would be, remember I showed in there, you take the first image of the sequence and make your adjustments to it,
Yeah.
and then you can synchronize those adjustments. Yeah, well, white balance would be one of those adjustments that you might want to make.
Even though you're
Well-
shooting a JPEG?
Yeah, you can still tweak, white balance on a JPEG after the fact. Of course, not to the extent that you can with a RAW. But yes, if you are shooting JPEG, yes, it's a good point. When you do set up your camera, depending on what your conditions are, what you're recording, you do want your white balance, to be in the ballpark if you're shooting JPEG.
Well,
Yeah,
one of the
it-
one of the
Go ahead.
things that I did today because of this class that we were going to have is I actually did a test run. I took 399 images and
Okay.
I just set up everything. I set my camera up to do time lapse and used all the defaults. One of the
Mhm.
things that I didn't pay attention to, and now I know, is that it was 1920 by 1080, but it was set at 60 frames a second. And when I did my 10-second, 399 photos, the thing lasted 5 seconds.
Yeah, like I say, you wound up with a very short video.
Yes, I did. So apparently, a default, I have a Nikon and
Mhm.
it was at 60 p.
Mhm.
I obviously have to change it to get it down to 30 frames a
Yeah.
second.
So let me ask you this: did the camera produce the final video internally in the camera?
Yes, it did. It's quite amazing. Very good.
Okay.
But it
The
was only
question-
20. It was only 26.6 meg
Right.
for
hmm
399 shots.
Yeah. The question I have for you is: do you still have access to the 399 individual files?
No, there's
No.
there's two different menu options in the Nikon. One is for that automatic created time lapse, and then there's another one that's for the interpolometer. So if
Yeah,
you want to
and
have
that's
all
what.
the files, then you have
Yeah,
to.
and that's what I was showing too with the
Yeah.
like the GoPro camera, the Osmo, and whatnot. Yeah, that's the same thing. Once they do it, you can't go back and get the original files. They just create it, and you get what is created. So yes, you do have to pay attention on the front end, to what those settings are going to be. Now, if you had set it to 30 frames per second to begin with, then yes, that video could, would have been twice as long in time. If you had a 5-second video, then it would have been, of course, a 10-second video. Now, if you have any video editing software that, and you might be able to do it in Adobe Premiere Rush, which is part of your normal Adobe subscription that you have. You can go ahead and take that. You have an MP4 file that came out of your camera. I'm assuming it's an MP4 or an MOV file. You can put that in there, and you can re-render it at 30 frames per second. You can put it in there and just tell it to render again at the slower frame rate, and have it double the length of time.
By the time I did all that, I'll just reshoot it. It was just a bunch of clouds.
But yeah, that's something to remember. Change it down to 30 frames per second. 60 frames per second is something that you would want for action, and it's kind of it sounds odd to me that would be a default that they would choose for that, because generally with time lapse you're looking to stretch something out, and show something that occurs over a long period of time. So I don't understand why the 60 frame per second.
I never used the time lapse before. I just turned it on and hit the button.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I don't remember if I've had this camera a couple of years. I could have changed it and didn't know it. But
Yeah.
So
The only thing
interesting.
I can say with that is, at 60 frames per second, it's going to give you very super fluid, very smooth motion. You're going to have a very short video, and things are going to move very smoothly in that 5 seconds.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
What about if you use 24 frames per second? What difference would that make? Have you tried that?
24 frames per second is very nice if you're going to play it back directly on your own device, or you're going to send somebody the file and they're going to play it back on their device. Then you get a very cinematic, motion effect at, 24 frames per second. The issue that comes in is if you upload that to YouTube, YouTube is going to reprocess everything and create all new files because YouTube is going to play it back for everybody that views it at 30 frames per second. So on the YouTube end, when you upload it, and then there's that long delay while it's processing.
Yeah.
Well, during that delay, it's going to insert extra frames because you've only got 24 frames per second. And to keep it the same length of time, it's going to duplicate some of that. It's going to duplicate some of your frames and insert them in order to stretch it out to 30 frames per second. And sometimes, depending on what you're filming, what the motion is, what's going on, sometimes you can detect that shift where they've inserted extra frames, and it just looks a little glitchy. It just looks a little off. It looks a little stuttery. It'll look buttery smooth and beautiful and cinematic when you play it on your own computer, when your computer knows to play it back at 24 frames per second. But you upload that 24 frames per second to YouTube, they remix it and play it back to everybody at 30 frames per second with extra frames inserted. You don't know what it's going to look like. Does that make sense?
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
when you were talking about setting up the camera, you suggested manual aperture settings, manual shutter speed. What about focus mode?
Well, that depends on what you're covering. If you have something that's actually going to change its distance to the camera closer and farther away, you may want, autofocus. Your video might look a little weird because your focus could jump a lot between frames if your subject moves a lot, between frames. But typically, like I say, you might want fixed focus if it's something that's that's not changing its distance to the camera. Right. It's not going to matter anyway. But if you're on autofocus, and you do want autofocus if your subject is going to be changing its distance, to and from the camera. But it also could end up being an odd looking video in the end.
What did you do when you did the hyperlapse? What did you
normally, it's a good question. Normally what I do is if I'm using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, I will put it in manual focus and set it to a distance, typically infinity. Typically I'll be using a lens, with a very deep depth of field. Some of the stuff you saw was shot with a 14 millimeter lens that at f8 has a depth of field of 3 feet to infinity. Effectively, it's pretty much everything is in focus. With that lens at f8, and so nothing matters. When you get into like the Osmo Pocket camera, the GoPro camera, those things have great depth of field too. You're not really going to notice anything going on. It's if you get into something where you're picking a very shallow depth of field, you're using an f1.4 lens, an f2.8 lens, and you're focused on something that may move around, closer and farther from the camera, that you definitely want to make sure that you have it on autofocus so that your subject does not move in and out, of focus.
If you are shooting horizontally, though, where the subject is a stationary distance, it wouldn't matter. Right, correct?
And it doesn't matter vertically either. I included, just so you could see in that intro, a vertical video of the Milky Way too.
Right. No, but I'm saying as long as you're staying in the same plane.
Yeah.
It's just the same distance, from effectively, technically speaking, from your camera sensor.
Okay, and I have one stupid question. I've never used a battery grip. I had one, but it was too heavy, so I sold it. But now I'm thinking if I do want to try this for some strange reason, when you put batteries in the camera grip, does the camera automatically know it's there? And I don't think anybody in our club shoots R5 except for me, or if they do, they're quiet about it.
Every camera that I'm familiar with knows the grip is there and knows the extra batteries are there. And typically what they do, the camera runs through the battery that's inside the camera first. Right. As that battery depletes, then it switches over to the grip and goes to battery number 1 in the grip. And then as that depletes, it goes to battery number 2 in the grip. So the camera will run through 3 batteries without shutting itself off.
Yeah. And the Nikon, you can actually tell which one is primary.
Right.
But yeah, if I'm worried about it, like I say, I don't have a grip for all of my cameras. So cameras that I don't have a grip for, I plug that dummy battery in. And if I'm within an extension cord length of an outlet, I plug it in with a transformer adapter and plug it in with an extension cord, and it'll run, it'll run forever. And otherwise, I've got great big Anchor battery, battery power banks that will run, that'll run the camera for 6-7 hours, and I plug the dummy battery into one of those.
Yeah, but I'm not going to put a hole in my camera.
Do you have your camera right?
As I said, you have to check the camera because certain cameras have an access port built into them.
Yeah.
Like I pointed out, I shoot with Fujifilm cameras. Every Fujifilm camera has a port in the battery door for a dummy battery cable to come out of the door so that you can keep the door closed, but have the cable come out without drilling holes. I know a lot of people that shoot Canon have to drill holes, if they want to do that. I don't think Canon on their models has an access port for that.
I don't think so either.
So Jim, while you were doing while the video was running, I looked at my camera and I didn't see how to do that. You've got your
It's
camera.
there. There's a little rubber plug next to your battery.
You've got the camera right there. Can you just bring it up to the camera and show me?
Say it again.
You've got your camera right there, don't you?
Yeah. I got an XC3 here.
Don't drop it on the floor because of me. Okay, so how did you do
Let
it?
me make sure that still works. Yeah, okay. All right. Can you see this?
Yeah,
Let me get something to point with. All right, can you see this?
yeah,
Right there, do you see that?
yeah, I saw that, but I couldn't get it to open.
Pry it open.
You open the battery door,
Poke it out.
and then you reach underneath it with your fingernail and you pop it open.
Okay, that I tried to do that, but it didn't work, but at least I know it's supposed to do that, so I'm not gonna break it if I do.
Okay, there. I don't know if you can see that, but see,
Oh, yeah,
it's
I
open
see
now.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, I see it.
I just put my fingernail under it and popped it open, and now there's an access port. That rubber plug, water seals it when you're not using a dummy battery, but you pop that open, and now you've got an access port for the dummy battery cable to come out of the battery door.
A lot of other cameras have a port on the side where you just plug in the power.
Yeah, and like I say, a lot of modern cameras now, as I said, with these cameras, you've got all three options. You can put a battery grip on it. You can run a dummy battery, out of the battery socket, or you've got the USB port on the side, and you can power it through the USB port. Plug a USB cable in there and plug the USB cable into a power source, and you can power it there. These Fuji cameras give you all three options, total flexibility. But if you have a USB port on the camera, most cameras, you can power the camera through the USB port and let it run that way.
I have
that was-
that.
Yeah.
That's
I have
good.
that, Jim, where I could put a little USB.
Yeah, there you go. Do
Yeah.
that.
Have you ever tried plugging the power source into the car, into your car battery? Like through the,
Oh yeah, well I have a, I have an inverter in my car and my truck. Both have inverters in them, and I plug them into that. Yeah, absolutely, I've done that. Yeah, I've run an extension cord, regular electrical extension cord off the inverter, out the window of the car and out to the tripod.
Jim, when you were shooting that Milky Way video, did you use an external battery or just internal battery?
All of those that you saw were done. I had three different Milky Way time lapses in there, and all of them. One of them was done with the battery grip, with the 3 batteries in it, and the other 2 were done with the dummy battery connected into a 2600 milliamp hour Anchor power bank battery that was just velcroed to the tripod leg.
All right, because like I said, I did a test run today, an hour long, 399. And, you know, I have these batteries, these EL18s in my Nikon, and it literally on my camera says it's still full. So
Mhm.
I don't know how long it lasts. I guess everybody, if you want to find out, you know, run your camera for an hour or two and see how much juice it takes. I mean, it looks
Yeah.
like mine would run for a while.
Yeah, everybody's camera is going to be different, and depending on the model of the camera, the processor that's in the camera, the size of the files that you're writing, and the capacity of the battery that's in the camera, it's all going to vary.
And the temperature
Yeah,
outside.
the temperature. If it's cold out, it will definitely deplete the batteries. If you're doing a Milky Way or a starry sky, time lapse in January on a cold night, your batteries are going to run down a lot faster. That's a good point, Lynn.
That's interesting. Did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yep.
Yeah, batteries don't like it cold.
They don't get cold.
Yeah, at some point, Jim, I'm going to pick your brain because I'm going to Antarctica at the end of January. And boy, I had a whole issue with my rather inexpensive. Well, I had a nice point and shoot, Canon Pro shot something or other, and my camera froze. And it was one of those things where the zoom goes in and out by its, when you push the button.
Yeah.
And while it turned out to be a blessing because I finally got to enjoy the animals without freaking out about, taking pictures. And I figured 4,000 other people had better cameras than I did, and they'd have great pictures too. But
Are you familiar with hand warmers? The
Yes, I
little
have
chemical
them,
hand
yeah.
warmers?
yeah.
Yeah. Rubber band one or two of
Onto
those
the
to the bottom of the
camera.
back of your camera.
Damn, that is a great idea.
They even have warmers you can buy a warmer, think of leg warmers. Well, they got warmers for lenses that are electronic or electric.
Hey, Diana,
Yeah,
just really,
And what you mentioned, Lynn, is also a good point. If you're doing night sky stuff and the temperature change could produce condensation on your lens
Yeah, I
throughout
had
the night
that.
as well. And having one of those warmers on it or a hand warmer or something, like that on the lens will help prevent condensation from forming on your lens throughout, throughout the overnight hours if you've got it sitting out there. I also had one time lapse I did one time where it got very dewy through the night. But it was very interesting that as the dew slowly formed on the lens, when I woke up the next morning and looked at it and scrolled through the images, you could see it was a very artistic, gradual, blur, where things just faded away, and turned into this blur. And it was very artistic and cool looking, actually.
We had that in the Amazon because of the humidity, and we had to leave our cameras outside, which was okay considering that we were on a boat and stuff like that. But one time I left it outside on our patio, like on the balcony of our room. And by the time I brought it from the balcony through my air conditioned room and out the front door, it hit the lens.
Yeah.
Lynn, what's the name of those camera thingies?
They're lens warmers.
Camera lens warmers?
Yeah, lens warmers.
Where do you
Yeah,
get
they have them on Amazon.
Amazon?
Yeah.
Cool. Man, you're a wealth of information always. We should
Yeah,
have a website, 1-800-ASK-LYNN.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Barry is familiar with the same concept too, because they do that with telescopes to keep that from happening when you're working with telescopes at night. Isn't that true, Barry?
That is true. Yep. They also recommend that you put a dew cap or a long lens hood. That helps a lot.
Yep.
Well,
What's a
keep-
dew
You're
cap?
pointing up at the sky where the dew's coming down.
yeah, like a big long lens hood, like you'd use for a telephoto lens or for
Like-
a wide
like-
angle lens.
Like see this? A
Yeah.
really long
Oh,
lens
like,
cap.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That helps. That helps a lot.
Cool. Nice.
Any more questions, guys?
Probably a
Come on, I
million.
know you have them. Come on.
This sounds like a lot of math.
Sylvia?
Well,
Yeah, I do want to point
it's
out-
actually if you want to consider 30 frames per second, the math is actually very easy. It's easier than doing 24 frames per second math. If you're doing 30 frames per second, then all you have to remember is every 30 pictures you shoot gives you 1 second of video.
Okay, I got that.
So 60 frames is 2 seconds. 90 frames is 3 seconds. 300 frames is 10 seconds. So there you go. If you want a 30-second video, 900 frames. Now you can slow that down. It'll eventually start to look stuttery. If you can slow down your frame rate. If you're going to play it back yourself or directly send somebody a file or whatever, you can slow down your frame rate. You can go down to about 18 frames per second to stretch it out, and it won't look real smooth, but it won't look real bad. By the time you get down to 16 frames per second, between 16 frames and 12 frames per second, you get into the realm of, if you remember, silent movies. What the silent movies used to look
Charlie
like.
Chaplin.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
You get any lower than almost like a slideshow.
Yeah. 16 frames per second is the border of where the human brain starts perceiving it as, actual motion instead of still frames. Happens right around 16 frames per second. But what made the silent movies look funny is they filmed them at 16 frames per second, but that's because film was expensive. So every frame counted. So they were just using less film by filming it at 16 frames per second. But since that was right on the borderline of what the human brain perceives as motion, when they played it back, it would play back at 24 frames per second. So not only was it jerky looking, but it was fast jerky looking, because then it was speeded up from what it was recorded. So you had two effects going on that made it look comical.
Mm.
So what software did you use to produce your professional looking video presentation?
Adobe Premiere.
Oh, okay.
It's some of
Yeah,
that
and
stuff.
anybody that's interested in video, I'm willing and would like to put together a video 101 boot camp. Basic video skills, because I'll tell you, you do have a leg up by being a still photographer with some of the concepts for video, but there's a whole lot of what relates to video that's an alien world.
Yep.
And there's lots of free information and tutorials out there on YouTube. The issue is you don't necessarily know what to look for, and the YouTubers that are out there are just putting things out there in random order. Nothing is, follows through. Well, you need to understand this before you learn that. It's all random stuff. And you also have guys that, are contradictory. There's guys out there that say, never do this, always do that. And then another guy says, oh no, never do that, always do this. And you trust me, I know, I've been there. You can waste a lot of time trying to figure out things just by randomly jumping around and looking at YouTube tutorials, as opposed to having a structured step-by-step sequence of, basic video instructions. So I am willing to do that for anybody that wants it.
You're talking about putting a bunch of stills and making a movie out of it. I did that once with the Apple program, with the iMovie. It took me a long time. It was interesting and I enjoyed it. I haven't looked at the movie since I made it, but I'd love to learn how to do that with using still photos and using Adobe.
And yeah, Photoshop does that. And that's what I went through in this video. And you can play that back, again, as many times as you want and see that for reference. But Photoshop has a timeline feature in it that it's very easy to put the time lapse together. All these time lapses that you've seen, the time lapses were all done in Photoshop. Every time lapse you saw in that video was done in Photoshop. The video itself was produced in Premiere Pro, but all the time lapses were done in Photoshop. It's just really quick and easy to do a time lapse in Photoshop.
So I'm looking at my Creative Cloud subscription, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Premiere Rush the one that you're talking about?
Yeah. No, Premiere Rush is like an ultralight version, of Premiere.
So Premiere Pro you have to buy.
Yes. Premiere Pro is Premiere Pro is $21 a month.
Oh no.
Yeah. Premiere Pro in and of itself is more than double what you pay just for your photography subscription.
no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
I actually
yeah.
use a different, I don't use Premiere Pro. I do some stuff on Photoshop, but like the videos that you saw me do for like the panorama, I did that on a program called Camtasia, which is made by TechSmith. That one is actually, it's I think $199 for the program. And it's a much simpler version of Premiere Pro is basically what it is.
Why didn't you use the Apple iMovie?
Because I've never used it, and I've had Camtasia for probably 7 or 8 years at least,
Yeah.
probably longer than that, probably 10 years.
Because it doesn't matter if you're using raw photos because a movie doesn't need
No,
raw.
I was
photos.
creating a video.
Right, no, I know that, but I'm saying using iMovie to create, using iMovie using your stills doesn't matter because you don't need a raw photo.
No, see, that has nothing to do with it. I was creating a video using the program. So.
Oh,
basically-
sorry, okay,
yeah.
I didn't understand that, Lynn, got
Screen,
it.
the whole screen and all that, yeah. iMovie, you can make, I mean, I can make the slideshows that I make for you guys from all the photos that those are all stills. I do those with Lightroom. That's easy peasy.
Right.
And so why do I need to go in iMovie when I can do it in Lightroom? But yeah, Camtasia actually is a way to use, it's a video, you can produce video with it. So like it records your screen while you're
Right.
doing something, but you could also use it you plug in, video. The one I did for the panorama, you saw me, I took a video with my phone and I plugged that in right into the
Right.
video that I was doing on screen. So yeah, once you fill parts of it, then you bring all the pieces in with Camtasia, you can put it all together pretty quickly. And it's, like I said, it's a little simpler than, video is not simple, but let's say it's a couple of levels below Premiere Pro. Let me grab my camera for Jim.
Yeah, I have an idea as just a test. I'm gonna take those 900 images, print them at 5x7 and just flip them from front to back to see if it looks like
The old-fashioned way.
those old films, those old film cards.
Yeah, you can do like a cartoon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cartoon guys.
Like a Mickey Mouse cartoon,
There you go.
Yeah, that'll
It's
work.
worth noting that some cameras do have a time-lapse movie mode in
Right.
addition to or instead of the intervalometer. I know my Canon M series, I have the M6 Mark II and the M200. Both of them have a movie mode and it's a video mode. So it'll do it in camera and it'll even keep the camera off and just take the pictures by itself. So it doesn't use a whole lot of battery. Diana, your R5 will have the same thing.
Say that
It'll have-
again, Barry, I'm sorry, I zoned out a little bit.
Your camera, your R5, your Canon R5 will have a movie mode, a time-lapse movie mode,
Oh, does it?
which will make the video in camera. You just choose a number of pictures you want, the interval between them, and it'll show you the amount of time it'll take and stuff like that. So you don't have to go, you can do it with an intervalometer. You have both
Right.
options.
Yeah, there's a lot of cameras now that you have the option for it to produce the movie for you.
Right.
One of the advantages if you're doing something special, over time, and it takes a lot of exposures. I'll give you a specific example of it. It can be advantageous to actually have the stills for you to create it itself, rather than have the camera create the movie itself. Because if something happens during the time you're filming it that you don't want to happen, if you have the original still frames, you can skip a few still frames here and there if something happened in one of those frames that you don't want. When your camera is making the movie, you get what you get, the good and the bad, and you're stuck with it. I have 2 instances where I had things I was able to fix. There was one time, some of you guys may remember this, Camera Club. We went out one time to photograph the Perseid meteor shower out in the hayfields in Thanodosassa. And I set up a camera to run time lapse. And at one point, Robert had a red headlamp, and Robert walked in front of the camera with his red headlamp during the time lapse. And because I had all the original exposures, I was able to cut a few frames out where Robert walked back and forth in front of the camera with a red headlamp on.
Well, that
If
was
you're
neat.
recording in movie mode, you've got that recorded. Another time, in fact, the Milky Way sequence that you saw in the intro there that had all the clouds moving through and everything that was really nice. I did that out at the Kissimmee Prairie State Park at the Dark Sky Astronomy State Park, and did that out there. And I was way out in the middle of the field in the middle of the night, and I had 3 cameras running time lapse. And all of a sudden, somebody that was out there hiking came out there and realized I was out there and wanted to know what was going on, and turned on this ridiculously bright flashlight and started shining it on me and shining it around the woods. And all of a sudden, you know, in all 3 of my cameras, I had several frames of somebody shining a flashlight all over the woods and the trees and everything. And because I had all the frames, I was able to cut that out. And if you miss a few frames here and there, you're not really going to notice in the time lapse. But if you are running movie mode in the camera where it produces the movie, you've got that and it's in your movie, because you don't have the original still frames to go back to and cut those out.
And you couldn't cut it out in editing?
If you have a video editor and you're really good, you could go back, you know, and cut that out, splice it back together,
Yeah, never
make
mind.
it look smooth, you know. But you have to have video editing software, you know, then to do that, because you've got an MP4 movie file that's or an MOV file that comes out of your camera, and then you have to have a video editor that you can put that file into, and you know, and basically do a cut and splice job on that video.
Barry, have you used, oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for those of you that are shooting Nikon, there's 2 different places where you can do time lapse. If you're in the shooting menu, which is the camera, the picture of the camera, it would be called interval timer shooting. And then if you go into the menu for video, which is the little like video camera, that one, it's called time lapse movie. So you want to use the interval shooting menu.
That's the one that will leave you with all the individual exposures. Yeah. And the other nice thing is if you have all the individual exposures, you know, especially if you're shooting like night sky stuff and whatnot like that, you get 1 or 2 frames where you capture a meteor in the frame or something. You might want to have that as a nice still photo that you're going to process and post online. And that's nice then that you have it. I've had plenty of times, you know, where, you know, just filming for time lapse, I've caught some very nice meteors, you know, just as a coincidence, you know, while doing a night sky time lapse, and take those individual still frames and, you know, process them and have them to work with.
Well, guys, any more questions?
Yeah, another thing about the Nikon, the battery door open doesn't affect the operation of the camera.
Right.
You can
That's
have
good.
the battery door open, the camera works fine.
Yep, some cameras require that the door be closed for the camera to operate.
Battery.
I seem to remember on a Nikon I had, in order to use a grip, you had to remove the battery door.
It depends on the model.
Yeah.
Some of them, yes, some of them, no.
Mhm.
The newer ones, no.
I'm living in the past.
Any other questions, guys?
We done?
I joined.
Just
I
FYI,
joined.
yeah, just FYI, keep this in mind. This is probably going to be an assignment for next year sometime.
Yeah, that's what it's sounding like.
Because I think, you know, we pay a lot of money for these things, and we only use a small fraction of what they're capable of. So, and I mean, even these lovely little things, the phones, they could do all that stuff as well. So, I mean, we're trying to kind of push everybody to try some different stuff. It's also a great thing to do when you're, you know, if you're in a rut with your photography, your still photography, try some time lapse. You know, you guys seen me, some of y'all have seen, I did time lapse. I shot a time lapse on my camera, and then I took those and as still images and pulled them into Photoshop and made those beautiful painterly clouds. So there's a lot of things you could do with this type of shooting besides time lapse. So keep that all in mind. But you know, if you do a couple of them, you saw he strung a bunch of different ones together. And if you guys were here last Friday night and I showed that sample of what Michael Shainbloom did, it was a, you know, it's a cityscape, but it was a, you know, different time lapses that he spliced together. So, I mean, it's not like you're only going to have you'll have to have a 30-second image or a 30-second video. You can make it longer by doing multiple ones on the same subject, or not even the same subject. I've seen video time lapses where they're switched from place to place, and you're like, okay, what's going on now? But you're only seeing 30 seconds of each thing. But yeah, so there's a lot you can do with these things besides the still photos that we see and we shoot every day. So
Lynn, were we recording this program?
pardon?
Did we record this program?
Yes. Yeah, I know you missed most of it. Sorry. Where are you? Are you still in Florida?
I'm still in Florida. We're in the hotel now, but the movers came in today and loaded everything. So I made it though here.
Anything else, guys?
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I have another one. That movie that I created today, 399 shots. I opened it up in iMovie. I have an iMac or a Mac, and iMovie, it looks like I can individually cut out sections of that.
Yeah,
That's good. Yeah, it gives you some editing capabilities then.
yeah, it does. Yeah.
Good.
That's why I asked that question, because that's what I had to do with some of my stuff when it got jerky. Yeah,
iMovie is like a super simplistic movie editor.
which is what I need.
Yeah.
You
Idiot.
can even do that when
all
you
the fancy
shoot HDR.
stuff. Yeah. but-
When you shoot HDR, you can use iPhoto to take out separate images.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
there are basic stuff. Even if you have Windows, there's a built-in native Windows video editing app that gives you some very basic capabilities. Where if you already have a video file as opposed to still files that you need to cut, splice, add some audio tracks to, things like that. There's one built into Windows. iMovie is built into Mac. Every platform has its own native, built-in, very lightweight, very basic, very simplistic video editor.
I'm very simplistic.
Yeah, me too. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
My brain is running out of memory bank.
And I say in Photoshop, Photoshop you've got Photoshop. Photoshop does some basic video editing as well. A lot of people are not aware of that. Are you guys familiar with that timeline option that you saw in my Photoshop there? I can bring it.
Yeah, bring it up and show it to them.
Yes, I'll share my screen. I'll bring it up and I'll show it to you.
Super easy to add. In fact, if you bring
and it's
video into Photoshop, it will automatically come up. But
it's like a super light version of Adobe Premiere built into Photoshop. So let me get it launched here, and then I'll share my screen and show it to you so that you know that it's there, because it's a step up. If you want to step up from iMovie or the built-in Windows app or one of those things, what you got have built into Photoshop is like a stepping stone toward Premiere.
Well, and Rush will do that as well. So Premiere Rush, which is included if you've got the
Rush actually, from what I understand, is not included in your basic subscription anymore.
Oh, really?
They changed it. Yeah, it's now one of those, they call it a freemium app, free to try. And, you can try it for like 30 days and then pay for it. Yeah.
No, mine is. I just looked at it.
Rush is included. Yeah.
Well, maybe
a lot of people have complained to Adobe about them mislabeling it because it looks like it's free, but it's free for 30 days unless they've changed it again. Adobe keeps changing things.
It's also maybe when you got your subscription. I have a really old, I've had my subscription for a while, so maybe that's why. But mine just says install, create and share online videos anywhere, and it says install.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and if you got it, like I say, that's, but I'll tell you this, because since I have all of them, the interface for Premiere Rush is its own thing, and it's not actually, it's not a whole lot like Premiere Pro. It's actually very different in a way. What you get in Photoshop is actually, the interface much more closely resembles what you would step up to in Premiere Pro. I'll do some quick things in Rush instead of opening up Premiere Pro. And when I jump to that interface, I'm lost for a few minutes because it's actually so different in Premiere Rush than Premiere Pro. It's not like a light version of Premiere. There used to be, I don't know if they still have it, there used to be Premiere Elements. And I don't know if that's still around or not.
No,
So speaking of that, in your world, obviously you're a Windows man, so you're not going to use Final Cut Pro, but with the people, your other fellow professionals, is there an opinion of Final Cut Pro versus Premiere?
Yeah, the three top competitive NLEs, NLE standing for nonlinear editor, are Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, and DaVinci Resolve, and and I think Final Cut. I think it's Final Cut X now. Final Cut 10. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, those are all they all very much resemble each other. They're all meant to do the same thing and are very much like each other. They have a few differences in the interfaces and stuff, but they're all at equivalent level of what they do.
It's kind of like the Apple versus Mac or Windows. My stepson, who is a documentarian and has got a couple Emmys, he uses Final Cut Pro all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He's an Apple guy. Are you going to bring up Photoshop, Jim?
Yeah, I'm working on it right now because I want to get a set of files to bring into it.
Is anybody, I'm looking at I've never looked beyond my Creative Cloud thing, but there's a thing called Aero, Design Augmented Reality Experiences. You tried that, Lynn?
That's nothing you want to mess around with. That is totally unrelated to anything we're talking about here.
No, I know. I just was looking at it.
I can tell you about that. I see that every day.
You what?
I see that every day.
I believe it, Jim. I've seen some of your creations and they're funny. I love it. I want to live in Jim world for one day.
It's a trial. Trial and error, mostly error.
I remember when I first joined the club, and you had something with cowboys, and I didn't know what you had created. And I'm like, holy crap, what did I get myself into?
Yeah, you should see it from my side of the fence.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that's what I love.
Okay, here we go. I've got something that'll work here. Okay. All right, let me come back to you guys here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do something like I'm going to do a time lapse. So you want to tell it File, Open, and then you want to find, let me go where I need to go here. As has been mentioned before, I have a lot of drives connected to this computer.
Holy banana brain.
Let's see. How about a meteor shower? All right, that'll work. So you find a folder that has a bunch of images in it, and what you want to do, you want to click on an image, but then only one, and then look right here. Do you see this thing that says Image Sequence?
Mm-hmm.
That tells Photoshop right there, hey, I want to make a time lapse. That's the big thing. You don't select all your images here and tell them to open. You just select one, and then you tell Photoshop, you check this box, Image Sequence. Mm-hmm. And Photoshop, that tells Photoshop a bunch of stuff in the background that says, oh, you're going to make a time lapse.
So why don't they just label it time lapse?
Good question. It's Adobe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Adobe.
And then you see it comes up right here, frame rate,
And it's
what
better
frame
to
rate.
have, he might have had, he didn't check to see that those frames were all part of this deal. What I normally do is put them in a folder by themselves, so I don't have
Yes.
to worry about there be some wacko frames at the end or at the beginning that aren't.
Yeah,
there.
this one has some odd frames in it, but it does show you, basically what you need to know. But here's where you get to pick your frame rate. Here,
It's going to look
here-
slightly different in
the-
Apple, by the way, guys.
this drop down has all the standard
Okay.
frame rates in it, but
Yeah.
you see the default is 30, which, like I say, if you're going to play it back on YouTube, it's going to play back on 30 anyway. So you may as well go with 30, right here. And when you're setting up your interval sequence in the first place, and you're doing the math in your head, if you understand you're going to have 30 frames per second, it's easy to do the math to know how many frames you shoot as to how long your video is going to be in the end. So it brings up that, and there's the first frame in that folder, which just happens to be a dark frame. But my Zoom stuff is covering up my menu options. Let me shrink this a little bit. Okay, there we go. What you need to do is go to Window, and you notice there's a thing right here that says Timeline. You see that?
Yeah.
Check that.
And voila. It looks
Voila.
like
Now you've got a video editor down here. Basically what you have a miniature version of Premiere Pro, a very light version of it down here. So, here's the video right here. So I'm gonna stretch it out, in scale. But this is all the pictures that are in that folder. It has now already decided, hey, here's a video. Here's your playhead.
Mm-hmm.
And you can scrub through this video, and see. I'm actually, scrubbing through all the frames, and you can see what's going on. So I can already see that, I've got junk frames at the beginning that, have nothing to do with this. They were just test shots. So I can put the playhead right here and say, I want to cut those frames out. That's what see the little scissors right there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm hitting the delete key, and those frames are gone now. So now what I should have left is just, nothing but, a night sky. And there is some more junk in there. I moved the camera around this night, but this still would come together as a video. And you see right here, it says audio track.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. How did you get your music in there?
You just drop a music file right there. It is literally that simple.
Yep.
You put it on your desktop?
Anywhere you just
if you have a music file, like an MP3 music file or a WAV music file, you drop it there. I'll go ahead and let me go ahead and do that for you. Let me find I'll get a random music file here. It's happening on a different screen right now because I have 3 screens. So I'm just navigating right now to where I know some music files are.
So if you have a Mac computer, Lynn, you would just go to your music and pull up a thing from there?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can. Yeah, the only issue with music is you have to be careful about what you use because of copyright.
If you're going to publish it online, you have to beware, copyright,
There's actually
stuff.
I found in the Mac, there are some there is music in there that is, you don't have to worry about its open use. The stuff that I use in the slideshows is like that. It was already out. It was somehow already, I don't know if it was from Adobe or where it came from, but I found these files and they are just by searching music, and they came up and they're MP or they're audio files, and I was they're and they're actually pretty short, they're made for that because they're all instrumentals.
So just Google search?
No, it was on my Mac, my iMac.
And some of your built-in lightweight, video things. I know the one in Windows has it. Premiere Rush has it. They've got some, free ones that you can use with no copyright, restrictions.
Right.
on them. So, I'm just going to pick a music file, and it's as simple as grab a music file
Drag and drop. Oh, wow.
and drop it to the audio track. So,
There you go. Oops.
mhm.
I went on the track.
Yeah, really, it's as simple as that, yeah, supposedly.
It seems to me that you accidentally dropped it on the video side. That's why you have
Yeah.
that blank screen.
Yeah, it might be what it is. Yep. Not so
Mhm.
it's a layer.
Yeah, I'm looking to undo it.
Command Z.
Oh, wait a minute.
He doesn't have a Mac.
There it is.
Control Z for him.
No, it opened it up on a different tab. That's what it did. So that's why there was no Command Z, Control Z. It had nothing. It didn't put it. It didn't put it right there. Yeah, in this case, yeah, okay, here we go. I see what it's doing. Never mind.
Had to add a do a plus, yeah. Only you drag it and drop it.
Can you copy and paste?
Yeah, okay. In this one, it wants you to click the little plus symbol here and then navigate to where the music is. Yeah, I'm too used to Premiere. In Premiere Pro, you just drag it and drop it, and that's my mistake for doing it that way.
Jim, what was the plus symbol?
The plus symbol right here, it means add a track.
Where are
That's
you?
it.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't see
okay,
it.
there.
Down at
Okay.
the bottom. See the
Okay,
where
got
the
it.
cursor is?
Oh, okay, I
Yeah.
see, I see it.
Yeah, see audio track right here at the end of the audio track plus. And so I clicked the plus, and then it said, okay, browse to a file.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm gonna pick a file. Okay, there it added it, and you can see the music is longer than the video. So I'm gonna just put the playhead at the end of the video. I'm going to select the audio track. See how I clicked on it and it has the white border around it. Then I'm going to take the scissors and click, and it cut the audio track right there. And so I'm going to delete the tail end. So now I've got an audio track that matches the video track in length.
Yeah. We may do some going, like Jim said, he's looking to do some more video type classes later on. So if you guys are interested, let us know.
Yeah, I would like to.
But
do
yeah,
that.
I say to do this in Photoshop, that's the trick. You have to go here where it says window, and you have to check timeline. Okay. And then once you have timeline, then you can do your work down here. So and this part right here is what they call an NLE, a nonlinear editor. This resembles Premiere Pro, DaVinci, Resolve, Final Cut Pro. They all have a timeline that looks like this with a playhead on it. Yeah. This is a lightweight version of what any real video editor looks like right here. You can add video tracks, add audio tracks, and do multiple things. And Photoshop gives you a basic editor. This gives you more tools than a built-in editor like iMovie or whatever comes in Windows. And it's kind of a stepping stone. It's really clunky compared to if you're willing to pay the money for one of the other products. But when you're all ready to do it, this once you have your creation here, as I showed before, you see the little menu right here.
Yep.
You click the render, and there's an option right here. It says render video. This is where you're actually going to make your movie. So you just click that and render video, and here's where you give it a name, and you tell it what folder you want it to go to. And for now, the rest of it you could leave alone. You can see right here it's going to be 1920 by 1080 is the file size. The frame rate is going to be 30 frames per second. You can muck around with that stuff here, if you wanted, but basically you just tell it render, and it's going to make your movie.
So I could just take a bunch of clips that I have, photos that I have, and create it that way.
Yes.
Are you going to include this in your video that you sent?
They all just need to be in a folder. And the other thing that Photoshop is quirky about, Photoshop has a hard time in this rendering process if they're not in sequential order. It'll stall and throw an error up at you if the file names aren't sequential. And the weird thing is, and this has always been a bug with Photoshop, of course they're going to come out of your camera numbered sequentially. But for some reason, Photoshop doesn't like that. You still need to take Lightroom or whatever and use your rename command and rename them again. The way they come out of your camera, 9 times out of 10, Photoshop won't like it, and it will stall and it will give you an error. And even if you go online and look at YouTube people telling you how to make time lapse, everybody will give you the same warning. Rename your files, in Lightroom or somewhere else before you put them in this timeline. Because unless something has happened, recently with Photoshop, it just doesn't like them. And you can even look at them, double check and see that, yeah, they all came out of your camera, all numbered, sequentially, but Photoshop still doesn't like it for some reason. You can give them the same name, as long as they're named sequentially, but for some weird reason, you've got to rename them yourself before you put them in here. That's one step. You could get all the way this far, and then have it choke on you if you don't go back and do that. And then you've wasted a lot of time and effort.
So how do you I'm sorry, Jim, I don't usually do this. So how do you name them? I usually leave the file number alone, because if I ever want to go back to the file, then
Diana.
Oh, that's easy. I'll show you that.
tomorrow. Okay. Okay, Lynn. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Jim, I'm spending time with her tomorrow. We're doing all these basic stuff tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, if anybody else wants to see that, oh my gosh, that is really easy. That's
Okay.
easy. That's a very simple Lightroom command if you've got your stuff in Lightroom.
Yeah.
In fact, you can even keep your original files out of the camera with their name intact.
Yeah.
And in the export dialog, the small files that you're exporting for your video, it has an option to rename them.
Right.
You have to export them for your video anyway. You're going to be in that dialog. You may as well just tell the exported files, to let Lightroom rename them sequentially. And then you don't even muck up your original files that
Okay.
way.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay. Along with.
But yeah, sir, if you don't know it, you do have a basic video editor built within Photoshop, but Adobe being Adobe, they don't make that easy to know by calling it timeline. Effectively, this is a timeline dialog. They're being very technically correct calling it a timeline, tool palette, but you have to know that, yeah, you always edit video on a timeline. If you're a video editor, that's, you just know that you edit video on a timeline. But for somebody that's new, you won't necessarily know that, oh, if I want to do video, I have to have a timeline.
If you go up to workspace, Jim, go up to
Mhm.
workspace. It has a video or motion. It's called not video, but motion.
Motion. Yeah,
Motion will
motion.
bring up
Yeah,
the
that will give
timeline
you
as well.
that will give you the timeline as well. That is correct. Yep. By choosing motion, that gives you. However, yeah, I don't normally do that because I have my own custom setup with all the tools, and doing that moves all my things around to where I don't know where they are again. So I just
go down and add that.
I just prefer to just activate the timeline and then leave all my tool palettes just the way I want them to be. Yeah, you'll see. If I go up here, see, this is my custom JRS normal workspace. If I go over here to motion, look over here. All my tool palettes and everything that I know where everything is, just disappeared and got wrecked. Yeah, I've got the timeline down here, like I want, but all my stuff, went away. So yeah, I'm going to leave it on my normal workspace where all this stuff over here on the right side and everything is what I know is where I want it to be, and simply, turn the timeline, on or off right here. So if you've got a custom tool set up, that could, you're going to lose everything that you know where everything is. You can just go here and do that.
All right. Any other questions, guys? Well, it's 8:45. Went longer than we thought we would.
Any questions about anything else? Doesn't have to be about this.
Well, we got time. Nope, I think everybody's tired. They want to go to sleep.
Thank you
All
very
right
much.
then.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
This is awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Very
All right,
interesting.
Lynn,
Jim,
I'll send you the link to the original video if you want to post it on the website then.
Well, I'll be
And
looking for it.
I would be interested in video thingies, Jim. So thank you, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Night.
Good night.